Well, thank you all for coming today. I appreciate that. I'm hearing like 7 things, so hopefully I'll be able to stay focused here. We'll see how good that works. But hopefully I'll get your attention first when we start off with, what if I told you, and maybe you agree with, that many businesses are using Gen AI wrong? Maybe not the right conference to say that at, but I'm going to go so bold to say that I do believe, and actually industry insight would tell us, that we're actually utilizing Gen AI wrong. And maybe we could think about something in the past that actually tells us this is true. So if you think about maybe when electricity arrived, how did we want to establish the history of electricity? The original intent of electricity was literally to make the room brighter. But was that actually the best innovation that we had from electricity? We moved from candle to light bulb, from light bulb to generating power plants, to power plants creating new cities, to cities creating new opportunities for us around the globe. So when you think about what perhaps started out as a candle to a light bulb, amazing innovation. I'm not trying to diminish the light bulb, amazing innovation. However, the real transformation of light became when we actually started to exploit what that was. And I would say that today, in Gen AI world, we're actually facing a similar moment. Not to actually improve the old, which is what a lot of people are focused on, but how to identify the new. And so as we think about that today, we're going to talk about what have you done with Gen AI, and more importantly, who's going to imagine what we have yet to do? And again, for me, that is the most important thing that we can take away from this, is thinking about what we want to accomplish. So where to start? As we think about Gen AI, one of the things I wanted to talk about for a moment are the 3 different levels of Gen AI. A lot of things that, again, many of you have probably heard about. The 3 levels as we sit there and talk about is, how do we unpack that Gen AI? We have summarizing existing data sets, repacking data into insights, and finding new insights and collaborations. And we know that most organizations today, actually 75 or north of 75% of them, are focused on the first 2. And if we use that example of my candle to the light bulb, you'd realize that, again, perhaps the true value is in number 3. 1 and 2 are table stakes. Again, not diminishing the importance of them, table stakes. But let's unpack it for a minute. Show of hands, maybe. How many of you have your greatest ideas baked on a baked strategy? Greatest ideas, most impulsive ideas. Does it align to your strategy? Or is it maybe when you're in the forever shower, or you're taking a jog, or you're not tackled to your desk? It's all baked in a strategy, so yes, you have a strategy, but most of your best ideas actually come from the edges. When you're actually not thinking about that, when you're allowing people to think outside of what they're most known to think about. We tend to run our businesses based on a very regimented strategy. What I will tell you is actually that's eclipsing number 1 and number 2. It's actually not allowing number 3 to happen at its fullest extent. So we're going to uncover a couple of examples where we might be able to help your organizations look at number 3. When we think about status quo today is built on linear thinking. And so if I were to ask how many of you are non-traditional, non-linear thinkers, a lot of people raise their hands, particularly in the tech field. However, most organizations are not built for non-linear thinkers. Actually, almost no organizations, I won't say all, but most are not built for non-linear thinking. When you think about the hard work, how many of you are stuck in pilot purgatory, as everybody likes to call it? You don't have to do all the show of hands, but latest statistics would say 95% of organizations are stuck in pilot purgatory. I would argue that part of the reason for that is that we haven't done the hard work of actually changing the infrastructure to actually enable people to think non-linearly. Gen AI is built on nonlinear thinking, right? Everybody's been talking about, well, we did this with cloud, or we did it with cyber, or we've done it previously. Those are actually all technologies that are built on linear thinking. They're O's and one's thoughts. They actually are predicting an if-then statement. AI, as we all know, is not. It's an unpredictable learning mechanism. So how is it, and why are we surprised that 95% of our pilots are stuck in purgatory? They're working on an infrastructure and an organization that's built for linear thinking. So how do we actually disrupt that a bit to enable us to think about the edges and actually do some of the harder work, which again, I would argue would be restructuring your organization, restructuring your infrastructure, and unlearning the things that you think you know. So as we think about that, what is this productive unpredictability? Again, I've talked to countless amounts of, whether it be executives or architects or just humans who are interested in Gen AI. The value of AI is that it actually democratizes innovation. It allows people who don't necessarily need to be coders or thinkers or people educated in AI tech to be able to actually explore. But again, when you think about organizations, those organizations aren't necessarily built to not just envelop that thought, because if I were to ask any of you how many of you appreciate diverse thinking, I hope all of you raise your hand and say we appreciate diverse thinking. But again, the organizations aren't built that way. Performance expectations aren't built that way. Infrastructures aren't built to learn. People aren't built to advance because they think you should have a certain title or a certain role or a certain goal. All those things put parameters on unpredictable thinking. So again, if we go back to the notion that AI is built on unpredictability and it will truly thrive in unpredictable ways, if the organization and the infrastructure isn't built to support that, we're limiting our thinking. I would say we're limiting our opportunity, and we're actually doing things based on what we think we know versus allowing our egos, and I mean that because everybody has an ego. It's a good thing. It's a good thing to have egos, is to put that aside to unlearn what you think you know. So when we think about how to go about doing that, so as I often think about, what can people do? I get asked a lot, yeah, I believe in all that, Deb. I believe in nonlinear thinking. I believe in changing our infrastructure, but we don't know what to do. I constantly get told by people that they're stuck in cement. And so I look at how do we unharness or harness the unpredictable thinking. I'll talk through a couple of different assumptions that, again, I would say we need to unlearn. So thinking about how to spot the edges. I don't know about you, but we all say we want to spot new talent. Look at examples like boards. Most boards are set up by people that are sitting in executive management. Not actually net new people who could bring new thinking and or new processes to enable that new thinking. And it's not to say that boards are bad things. It's to say, again, how do we rethink structure to be able to not just spot the edges, but to be able to translate them into sparks. I often have this conversation with people who are like, we need to do an idea-a-thon, a hackathon. How many of you do that to come up with ideas? The number one problem with hackathons and idea-a-thons, they actually almost never get implemented and they almost never actually all scale. So if you were an employee who came up with an amazing idea in this hackathon, how do you think it feels for that person to never have anything come to fruition with their idea? So when we think about is the system, in that instance of the hackathon or the idea-a-thon, matching the outcome, we actually want to change our organization, bring ideas to fruition, what usually happens in those? I mean, I'll tell you because I've been part of many of them. What usually happens is you tell the person with the brilliant idea that their idea is brilliant, but we can't do anything with it. I don't know about you, but that probably defeats the purpose. So if instead, how do we actually look at bending that and using AI to help enable those humans who have these amusing ideas to bring them into fruition? But we're seeing a lot on the Gen AI front right now. Again, table stakes for operational efficiency. Most of that operational efficiency is to automate existing processes. Why are we not stopping to say, do we need the process at all? Why do we not stop and say, is there a better way to connect these dots so that perhaps instead of just automating the broken process, we actually are looking at completely restructuring the way we think and the way that we operate to not just get operational efficiency, but to actually create net new processes that will actually be able to spot people at the edges. So harder work, but bigger return on the outside. The other one is how do we translate the sparks? So again, you don't have to show of hands, but how many of you got your greatest insight from a pilot or a prototype? If you did, how did you actually put that into action? Again, the statistics are high. 7 out of 10 pilots and prototypes that are found are often not actually put into execution. And I would say based on other research, the numbers are actually even higher. So why is that? Is it because a person didn't like the idea? Is it because the system in the organization wasn't allowing it to happen? But we do it over and over and over again because we want predictability. The question I'll also ask, how many of you need a playbook? Okay, playbooks are things of the past. AI can't work on a playbook. It's not built on a playbook, right? Again, back to the unpredictable learning. But as organizations, we're used to having playbooks. How do we run it? How do we scale it? How do we thrive it? Is there a playbook for that? Is there a rule set for that? How instead do we actually start to question, how do we have creative thinking? So perhaps we don't need a playbook, but that doesn't mean we have chaos. Chaos actually turns to a very different trajectory, if not actually managed in some way. And the last one is how do we embed the breakthroughs? So the best thing I love to talk about is metrics. Again, you don't have to show of hands, but if we were to talk about metrics, how many of you have been told that your best metric for AI implementation is speed? My follow-up question would be, how many of you know your actual baseline for what you're measuring speed against? Almost nobody does, by the way. And so when you sit there and think about that, if you're told you need to get AI into the implementation, into your environment faster, 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 fast was never a metric unless you actually know what you're measuring it. So again, how do we rethink metrics? How do we rethink performance? How do we rethink if we do need it fast, what is fast? Is fast in seconds? Is fast in months? Is fast the same for my company it is for your company? What does fast mean? Because we're running towards this notion of fast without actually understanding how to embed breakthroughs into our organization. So again, I often get the question of, okay, Deb, these all sound great, like logical, but we can't do that in our organization. Again, why? It's typically because we want the status quo and we don't like to have friction. AI will inevitably create friction. It does. It's positive friction. And I would say embrace that chaos because positive friction actually can create change. We're afraid of what we don't know. I sat on board last week, Fortune 50 company, and the organization's like, Deb, we don't even understand how to utilize Gen AI. We spent 15 minutes utilizing AI to be able to create a candy company. They're not in the candy business, by the way, but just to create a candy company. We did demographic research, we created a presentation, I had a jingle and a logo, we did all kinds of things in 15 minutes. And I did it simply so that people could start to understand the value of what they could see. I also did the opposite though. It's not just letting AI run for the sake of AI, how do we actually make them understand things around hallucinations? And how do you actually think in an unpredictable scenario? So we created this candy company that all of a sudden I had taking over the world in about 7.5 minutes to help show the point of now how do you think about hallucinations? How do you start to think about what AI is learning when you're not paying attention to it? How do you start looking at AI and asking it different questions so that if you have a space or a typo, by the way, you get a different answer? These are things that people aren't paying attention to because they're like, yeah, it's great. I can type and misspell and I still get an answer. So I went to another screen, I said, well, what if you type it correctly? Do you realize you get two very different answers? Do you also understand that you have hallucinations? If I happen to word my question and ask what kind of pet should I get tomorrow, if I happen to put and infer that I like a cat, I'll get a cat as an answer. If I happen to infer I get a dog as an answer. I'll ask again by show of hands, how many of you thank your AI? Most people don't. If you thank it, you get better answers. So there's lots of ways here that, yes, AI is going to allow us to democratize innovation and put new technology into our organizations, but you have to understand how to now kind of sort of manipulate this unpredictable learning. So I did this whole candy store in 7 minutes, and then we did it again with all misspellings. I just misspelled the whole thing, and we got a totally different candy company. And I said, these are the things you need to understand, not because you should be afraid of using AI or allowing people to play around with it or do different things with it, but understand what it really means to have human in the loop. Historically, when we think about human in the loop, we think about human in the loop like as a checks and balances. You had 5 things, I need to have 5 things. Human in the loop in an AI world is not just checks and balances. It's you looking at that scenario and saying, did someone write the AI code? And all of a sudden I ended up with a dog when I wanted to have a cat. And so understanding what that difference is super important as we think about how to put these into practice. And so I'll spend a little bit of time talking about how you can actually go about doing it realistically. So as we forge this path, and I know we're talking a little bit about Gen AI, but it would be applicable for broader AI, agentic AI. The number one thing that we tend to get is, well, it's going to replace people. It will change our talent trajectory as a co-pilot. I don't actually ever talk about it in the factor of like humanity will be gone tomorrow. It is actually a co-pilot for us as we think about innovation. So how do we spot the things that others overlook? I'm often an outlier. I love it. I wear that with a badge of honor to be an outlier. But we want other outliers. We want to be able to spot that there are people who are hungry to bring new ideas into your organization. It's not always easy as we think about traversing an organization. Again, there's performance metrics, there's titles, there's roles, there's things that fit into neat little boxes. There's homework that needs to be done to restructure organizations while we're working on operational efficiencies and we're working on all the table stakes. The competitive advantage is going to be to create new businesses. It is. The business that you see today probably isn't going to exist in that same way 3, 5, 10 years. I actually would think 3 to 5 years. Studies would say 10 years. But at some point in time in the future, most people will say, well, Deb, that's not my problem. It's the next leader's problem. It's everybody's opportunity. Flip the script, unlearn what you think you know to be able to get there. To that point, how do you translate discoveries into new ways of working? I'm a huge believer of sandboxes, but I'm a huge believer of sandboxes in actually representing your organization. Most sandboxes, again, I think it's 8 out of 10, don't replicate your current environment by people, process, technology, infrastructure, ecosystem, third parties. Part of what's going to be advantageous as we think about an AI forward world is going to be an ecosystem. What better place to talk about that on this floor when all you see is ecosystems? But I mean looking at your competitors as your partners, not as competitors. What you think is competitive advantage is probably not going to be competitive advantage in a year. And I don't say it to be like we should all be worried, concerned, dystopian. It is to look at the opportunity. How do you unlearn what competitors mean in this world of AI? And then lastly, embed what works. We're very afraid to put Gen AI directly into an environment and actually test it. Test it and learn from it. Test it and learn from it and make decisions in 30 days, 45 days, 90 days. It's not the traditional 6 months. I don't know about many of you. How many of you walk through an airport, a bathroom, a doctor's office, you see the happy button? So those buttons like, are you happy today? I'm like, I don't know, I just walked out of the bathroom of an airport. I don't know if I'm supposed to be happy. But the way that this is doing is because in today's age, the constant feedback loop. So your consumer, your customer, wants constant feedback. They want to be involved in the process. They want to understand what your product is going to look like tomorrow. The question for you as leaders and as organizations, are you going to change your product development lifecycle? Are you going to actually take all that feedback? What happens if you lose your customer? Can I utilize AI to change what this experience is? Consumers want more impact. They want more input. I started hitting the unhappy button a lot. Will I get an email? Will I have input into what this new bathroom is going to look like? Candidly, no, nothing actually happens. I've gone and talked to some of those companies as well. I'm like, what are you expecting? What's your metric? And candidly, their metric is like just a happy place. I'm like, well, what's happy for me might not be happy for you. So again, what's the metric of measurement? And then as we think about what the future holds and we think about automating predictability, I am the hugest believer in opportunity here. My mother died when I was young, and no child should ever have to suffer anything of that nature. And if we can use technology to solve for problems that we've never imagined solvable, we're in that moment right now to be able to solve for tomorrow. So all these are to say of diving in and how to make that work. The winners, quote unquote, won't be those that automate the unpredictability out. It's going to be those that can actually embrace what predictability thinks about and unpredictability by design. How do you build that unpredictability into your people, into your process, into what an org structure even looks like? I was working with somebody a couple weeks ago. What if we got rid of an org structure? 3 people in that conversation's mind exploded. They're like, we can't get rid of an org structure. What would happen? I'm like, I don't know, what would happen? Perhaps we can scenario what that would look like. Perhaps we could use AI to help us figure out what that would look like. But are we willing to break what we think we know in order to see the biggest amount of competitive advantage? I'd encourage all of you to think about all the amazing ideas you've had. Again, likely in the shower, on a run, doing something that where your brain is free to be able to think about it. And think about how you can employ AI while still doing it trustworthy in a secure and safe fashion. And at the same time, showing that value and showing that growth to others around you. That will be your competitive advantage. With that, I'm like talk like speed of light to be able to get that done in 20 minutes. I think I've got 60 seconds. But that being said, that is my discussion today. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to find me or to find me on LinkedIn. Otherwise, I greatly appreciate all of your time today. And that's it. So thank you.